By now, people probably know that I have quite the interest in music. I've made several shorts about musicians that have pretty insane physiques and they maintain those muscles while being on tour or while recording new albums. So I had an idea of making a video about a criminally underrated album that I always listen when I train in the gym.
And we only know one way to make people smile, and that's to play some material from 1995 from an album called Swansong. Oh.
This album is none other than Swansong from Carcass. It was released in 1996 and could be described as a death metal album, although it has several elements picked up from other genres like blues, believe it or not. And the guitarist of Carcass, Bill Steer, actually still plays in a blues hard rock band, which is pretty interesting. Now, the reason why I think this album is criminally underrated and overhated online is pretty simple. It marked a pretty big shift for this band, and pulling something off like this is no joke in a subgenre of metal like death metal. It's much more easier to do that when you are Metallica in the 90s and you've already put out one of the most mainstream and softened albums in the whole metal genre, like the Black Album, and you can afford to take the burden, even the punch of losing some fans and experiment a bit more. But in death metal, it's much more difficult to do. And at the time when Swansong was released in 1996, you had bands that pretty much dealt with the same themes over and over, like gore, horror, demons, possessions, those kind of things. You can imagine that an album that talks about very different themes like social injustice, how voting doesn't count, how some of the members don't care about any belief or cause of other people, like in the song Polarized, well, it can be a bit of an headache for hardcore fans. Death metal is a much more technical subgenre of heavy metal than many others. Due to that, even slight changes in tempos or the ability of the members of a certain band can drastically change the record. And one of the main complaints of haters of this album in particular is that it's substantially slower than the previous masterpiece, which was Heartwork. And now, due to copyright laws and copyright terms, I cannot show all the samples of these albums, but it really gives you the opportunity to listen to both ones to compare the difference. This difference in tempo or speed, I think it's mostly due to the drums, because even in newer records with a new drummer, Carcass always managed to pull out pretty good values in speed. So mainly the drumming changed. Everything is a bit more slower. The riffs are still pretty insane, but they are not the same of the previous album. And so, of course, die hardcore fans are not gonna like it that much. Also, the last mild headache, and this is for production nerds only, like myself, is that the guitar tones are a bit toned down and not as pristine as the ones in the previous masterpiece. I mean, if you just look a bit online, you will find that Carcass spent a whole month just to find the proper sound for guitars for Heartwork. But apparently they didn't do the same job for Swansong. But aside from these few issues, I think this album is criminally underrated. As I've said now multiple times, I think it's a real gem, and the track list is pretty tight. You have even a cover of Neil Young's Rocking in the Free World, which for all intents and purposes has now been turned by Carcass as Keep on Rotting in the Free World, which is pretty good. I have to say. And then you have slower songs that feel like death metal ballads, like Black Star, which is pretty much the only song that I see being mentioned even by haters on Reddit to be a good song on this album. I personally don't mind even songs like Rock the Vote and Polarized, which deal with more political issues or issues with the electoral process and people trying to lure you into their political stances or political religious quests. There are also pretty cool standard death metal songs like Go to Hell and Cross My Heart. And then you have things like Tomorrow Belongs to Nobody, which sounds death metal, but has a lot more bluesy kind of solos and definitely interludes that are not usual because, again, Carcass didn't do this kind of stuff on all previous albums. And let's just remember the fact that they started in grindcore making stuff like Reek of Putrefaction. Overall, this is not a masterpiece, but I think that all the hate that it gets online is pretty much over the top. I would say, in my personal scale of criminally underrated albums, this is a solid 8. The riffs are still amazing. Everything is a bit more slower, but the things are still chugging and the solos are still great, even though I would say they are a bit toned down by the difference in guitar tone. But aside from that, it's a solid one. It's a criminally underrated album. Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, and comment below with your favorite criminally underrated album that you listen to in the gym or when you're driving to work. I like this kind of stuff, so share it below. I'm really into that, and see you soon.